We'll do a review in Maimori Meluka. This is the second Maimer in volume 4 in Chelik Dalet. This is the Maimer that Rebbe said Shabbos Parshas Koirach Gimel Tamuz. H'tavshin Chav Dalet. The Maimer Yehi Hashem Elikeinu Imonu. Over here in the note it says that this is printed. It was published on Gimel Tamuz Tavshin Nun, and that was in honor for Gimel Tammuz that is coming upon us, and that is the day that the previous Rebbe went out of his incarceration, in which the beginning of the redemption of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz started. It stated on the Kuntras Beis Derish Chodesh Tammuz Shnas H'tavshin Nun. So this Maimer, the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe is based on a Maimer that the previous Rebbe said, and the Rebbe explains some details in that Maimer and in the Pasuk. He said it after he was let out of prison, and then he was supposed to go in for exile. And on his way to exile, he gave this sicha, he gave this an encouragement, and it was like a very powerful message of saying that we are not in exile, only our bodies are in exile. Nobody can tell a yid, dominate the yid when it comes to Torah mitzvahs. And but anyways, the Rebbe in this Maimer is going to ask several questions on this pasuk, and also on the Friedrich Rebbe's explanation, also on the pasuk. Of course, the pasuk says, "Yehi Hashem Elikeinu Imonu, Kasher Hoyim Aviseinu Al Yazveinu V'Al Yitshenu." So this is a pasuk in Melachim Aleph, Perek Ches, pasuk Nun Zayin. So basically, this is a prayer. We're saying, "May Hashem Elikeinu be with us, just as He was with our fathers. He shouldn't neglect us. He shouldn't let go of us. He should be with us all the time." And then I was going to ask many questions. One of the issues the Rebbe says, we say imonu with us. With us means only as a secondary. We should seemingly ask Hashem should be more. The Rebbe explains that the main avodah is the avodah of yira, and the avodah is bittul, is the avodah of subjugation. In bittul, there is the difference between yira and ava. Ava comes from above, yira comes from below. And therefore, we're saying imonu because it's really avodas ha'odom, it's really the work of man. And the Eibishter helps him in his avodah, but it's only imonu. And also explains why the Rebbe said over there that we are not like deserving as our forefathers, but since the Rebbe asks, the Rebbe was incarcerated and then he was sent to exile, was for his Mesiras Nefesh. Why is the Rebbe saying that we're really not deserving like our fathers? The Rebbe explains that in the level of bittul, level of yira, level of Mesiras Nefesh, there is various different levels, especially when we talk about having Mesiras Nefesh for things that are not very clearly obligated. That's going beyond what you're obligated. So it's really iman. We're doing it. It's not really Hashem telling us because we're going beyond. And the Rebbe explains how this all fits in. But let's go step by step. So so it's known the talk of the Baal Hagula, the master of redemption, meaning the Friedrich Rebbe's redemption is on Yud Beis Tammuz. Sha'omar begimul Tammuz Tofresh Pezayin. He said it on the 3rd of Tammuz in the year Tofresh Pezayin, as he was heading towards the exile. And this is what he said over there in the Sikha. He says, Mir beten ba'Hashem Yisborech. We ask by blessed Hashem. Yehi Hashem Elikeinu imanu kasher hoye im aviseinu. May Hashem Elikeinu be with us as He was with our fathers. Al yazveinu v'al yitshenu. Shouldn't let us go. It shouldn't push us away. It should hold on to us. Hashem Yizbarich. The blessed Hashem, continued the Friedrich Rebbe in that Sikha. Zol zayin mit uns. He should be with us. And also, wird sein mit uns, and He will be. This is sort of a promise. We're asking that He should be with us, and we're also saying that He will be mit uns, wird sein mit uns. Kasher hoye im aviseinu, just as He was with our fathers. And that was the essence of the talk that the Frierdiker Rebbe gave before he was sent off to Kostroma into exile. So we need to understand. So first the Rebbe wants to know, how could we include in one passage to say, may Hashem be with us and Hashem will be with us? Seems to be one is a request and one is a promise. So even though the pasuk Yehi can be translated Hashem will be, and we ask Hashem should be, but in the same sentence, how could we have asking Hashem and also Hashem promising us in the same sentence? As the Rebbe will explain later on, that in that level of bittul to Hashem, it's really both together, as we see at the end of towards the end of the Bible. A request and a promise are different matters, and seemingly they're opposite. Requesting means that you don't know if you're going to get it. A promise means that you have guaranteed to get it. And still, the Rebbe says, what was the language? Mir beten b'Hashem Yizbarach. We request, we ask of by Hashem Yizbarach, Zol zayin mit uns, that He should be with us, und wird sein mit uns, and He will be with us. So we're asking that Hashem to be with us, and we're also asking Hashem He should be, that He will be with us. Shabakoshe that the request that we're asking Hashem, loy rak zol zayin mit uns. It's not just we're asking Him He should be with us. Elogam, we're asking vet zayin mit uns. How could we ask about something that He would be with us? That is not a request. That's a guarantee. That's a promise. So how could we say we ask Hashem that Hashem will be with us? That's not a request, seemingly. But we're saying that Hashem bet zaymatut. So while the Rebbe says the pasuk itself can be actually translated both ways. You can say Yehi Hashem Elikeinu, He will be with us, and you can also say may He be with us. But how do we bunch them both up together? Although the word Yehi is both a language of a request and it's also a language of a promise, but there seems to be different ideas. So you can teach the pasuk one way, you can teach it the other way. But the Sikha, he includes both of these will be and asking, please be, or he bunches them all together. We're asking Hashem that He should please be with us, and we're asking that He will be with us. Okay, so that's a second issue. So the Rebbe asked, how could we combine the two aspects together? So further, he continued in that talk This that we're saying, Hashem shall be with us, and He will be with us. That we're asking Him to be with us. V'gam, and also Beloshen Avtocha, in the language of a promise. Who? Why are we doing that? How we say that? Hagam mir seinen doch nit gleich zu Avosenu. Even though we are not compared, we can't compare ourselves to our forefathers. Now, what is the source to say that when we're saying Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu, we're essentially saying, "Oh, be with us," and you and you guarantee with us, even though we're not like our Father. Maybe it just means we're asking should be just like what you are with our fathers. This twist that the Rebbe translates, even though we're not like our fathers, and still you should be with us. The Rebbe brings a source for that from the Medrash. The way the Frierdiker Rebbe explains Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu, that even though we're not like our fathers, is based on a Medrash. What is the source for this explanation in the verse Yehi Hashem Elokeinu? That is what we find in the Medrash. This is a Medrash Tilim in Chavov. So it says, "V'chein Shloime Omer lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu," and the same thing Shloime said before Hashem. This pasuk Yehi Hashem Elokeinu is a pasuk that Shloime was saying when he built the Beis Hamikdash. So he said before Hashem. He is teaching in the Medrash that also Shloime said this before Hashem. And what did he say? That Melech shehu soicher poyalim, a king who hires worker, vehein oisin melachtom yofe, and they do a good job, v'noisen lohem schorom, and he gives and he pays them. Ma shvach yesh lemelech, what kind of a praise is there to praise that king? The king that he's playing the workers that did a good job, there's nothing praiseworthy of that. That's self-understood. That's something which is deserved because they did a good job. They get paid. What is the praise of a king? When is he praised? When he hires workers which are not good workers. They don't do the job. And still he gives them their pay. That is a great favor that the king does. They didn't do a good job. They didn't do the job, and still he pays them. That's a great favor. And now he brings the pasuk, V'keinu Omer, Yehi Elokeinu Imanu kasher hoye im Avosenu. May Hashem be with us like He was with our fathers, which means even though we're considered like the non-good workers, we're asking Hashem to be with us just as He was with our fathers. They did good work. Even though we're not doing good work, still the Eibishter pays us. Well, that's the praise of the Eibishter. So we see that the Frierdiker Rebbe's teach that we are undeserving is based on this Medrash Tehillim, which explains the pasuk of Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu in this way. Why does the Rebbe say over there that we're not equal to our fathers? We can't compare ourselves. So Mevayer B'Hasicha, so the Sicha goes on. When the Frierdiker Rebbe said, the Sicha, the Zeh, She'ein Onu Yecholim Lihidomis L'Avosenu, this that we cannot compare ourselves to our fathers, who Ki Avosenu Hoyu Bali Mesidas Nefesh V'Poyel Mamish Al HaTorah V'HaMitzvos. The reason why we can't compare ourselves to our father is because our fathers were self-sacrificing, literally. They self-sacrificed for Torah and mitzvahs. So, and we're not like that. So, but what this is very difficult to understand. Here, the Frierdiker Rebbe is put in jail for spreading Yiddishkeit. He's being sent away to exile for spreading Yiddishkeit. This is Mesiras Nefesh Bepoil. How does the Frierdiker Rebbe say we are not deserving, we can't compare ourselves to our fathers? And even if it's an expression of humility, but this is humility is something which has to have some semblance of comparison. But over here, this is complete Mesiras Nefesh. Why does he say not deserving? So we need to understand. Saying this talk was in connection with his travels to exile in Castrama. Why was he being sent to exile in Castrama? And before the exile, the incarceration, why was he incarcerated? That was because of his literal, actual self-sacrifice for Torah mitzvahs. And the fact that he continued with all Yiddishkeit, defied the government, which landed him in prison and now on the way to exile. And this talk itself was Mesiras Nefesh. Not only for Mesiras Nefesh, this talk itself, saying this Sikha was also literally Mesiras Nefesh. To go ahead and speak these defiant words to the government that they cannot control a Yid, and the Yid is free to do Hashem's will. Nobody has to say. All this whole Sikha talk was in defiance of the government, and it was Mesiras Nefesh. Still, yet the Rebbe says, that we are not compared. We can't compare ourselves to our fathers that were Bali Mesiras Nefesh, and we're asking, okay, please be like our father, even though we're not like our fathers. How does it say that? As the Rebbe will explain later on, that Mesiras Nefesh comes from the level of bittul. And in the level of bittul, there can be various different madreges. Even when you have Mesiras Nefesh, bepoil, which comes from bittul, there can be different levels. And the previous Rebbe, because of his humility, said may not be the level of Mesiras Nefesh of Aveiseinu, of our fathers. But first, the Rebbe says, maybe the reason the Rebbe Taka himself had Mesiras Nefesh, that was, but he was saying it for all of the other people. So he wasn't really talking about himself. He was an exception. But the Rebbe says the Frierdiker Rebbe was talking about himself as well. Why does he say that doesn't have the level of Mesiras Nefesh? L'chayre, we can say the kivon shabakoshas bal hageula yiyah havaya lekemi mone hoyso. Since the request of the bal hageula of the Frierdiker Rebbe was when he's asking Hashem should be with us, he wasn't asking just for himself. Lo rak avur atzma. He wasn't just asking for himself. Elogam avur kol Yisrael, but he was asking it for all Yid. Koilel gam elu asher b'shem Yisrael rak yichuna. That would include even those people. He was saying it for all people, even for those Jews who are just called Yisrael. They're only called a name, which was in a letter that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote for the Chag, the celebration based Tamuz, that the freedom was for all Yidden, even for those who were only called Yidden. They're only called Jewish, but they really have no other connection to Judaism. So therefore, as a representative for them, that they cannot compare to our father who actually had Mesiras Nefesh, and the other people, not himself, but don't have the Mesiras Nefesh, so we don't deserve. We're still asking Hashem should be with us. But the Rebbe says, Biur ze'enim maspik. This is not a sufficient explanation. Ki bahaloshen mir seinen doch nit gleich zu aveisenu. When it says we are not the same as our father, so he says mir. Mir means us, including himself. Kolo gam esatzme, so he included himself. Maybe he said he's not like his father because this was humility. We cannot say this, that he included himself amongst those who are not Bali Misidus Nefesh B'Poil, and he said us because of the other ones, and his humility, he considers himself, he puts himself there as well, but in a way of humility. That's why we're saying it. Humility only applies something which is somewhat comparable. So your humility, you don't have the full level, but you have less. But to say you have now Mesiras Nefesh, Lepoil, he's been imprisoned and going to exile, which is actually Mesiras Nefesh, and saying we're not compared to our fathers is not comparable to say that we don't have, that we're not compared to them, and humility would not brought him to say that. There must be another explanation. As I mentioned, the Rebbe will explain at the level of Mesiras Nefesh, of Bittul, there could be various different levels. In the humility of the Rebbe, he didn't think that they reached the level of humility of the Avesenu of the previous generation, or the people, the Avesenu that had literal Mesiras Nefesh. Now the Rebbe is going to ask several questions on the pasuk. Up till now, the Rebbe asked on the Sikha what the Friedige Rebbe spoke. Now the Rebbe is going to ask in the pasuk itself. In addition to the yukim, the questions that we had in this on the Sikha, so the we need to also explanation in the language. Yihi Havaya Elikeinu Imanu. What is we are saying? May Havaya Elikeinu be with us. Shabakos of Atzma, which is just in the pasuk itself. The L'chayre would seem La'acharei Shoimrim Havaya Elikeinu. We already say Yihi Hashem Elikeinu. What is Hashem Elikeinu? Is we're saying that He is our God. That means He is ours. So He's our God. So He is ours. He's connected with us. Elikeinu. Ubefrat lamavur b'Chassidus, especially as explained in Chassidus. Elikeinu pirush koicheinu v'chayuseinu. Elikeinu means our power and our vitality. Elikeinu. So that means we have the koyach of Hashem. Hashem is our energy. Hashem is our vitality. So mat seirich levakoshe sheyimonu. So what is the need for the request that He should be with us? He's already Elikeinu. What are we asking? Let Him be with us. And also, the lashon of im, the Rebbe will actually explain that the Eibishter could be with you two ways. It could either be milamayla, like when you have the level of Ava, so He could be koicheinu v'chayuseinu. He's Taka Elikeinu, He's Hashem Elikeinu, He's koicheinu v'chayuseinu. But it comes milamayla. Here we're asking specifically that it should be imanu with us, meaning that we should work out the level of complete bittul mesiras nefesh. Let's go weiter. Another question, Gam Tzarech Lovin, also we need to understand, we say he should be with us. So it's not just saying that Hashem should be, but with us. With us means in addition. He's not the main. It's not like that he's our energy. It's just to be along. Why are we asking Hashem only to be with us? In other words, we're limiting to just sort of helping us, but it seems like the main thing is us. Also he says, be with us as you were with our fathers. The Loshen im, when we say the word im, neufel al davar, this applies on an item, shehu tofel lahad davar shehu imoy, that is secondary to the item which is with you. So there is you, and then there is the with you. With you, it means something else is along with it. As the Rebbe brings the example, as we say, Kemoy in the Gemara, we say, Yachleku Yoshe Habal Yershe Ha'ab. There's an issue over there. Who gets the inheritance? So it says that the inheritors of the husband will get together with the inheritors of the father. The main ones are the Yershe Ha'ab. With them, along with them, comes Yershe Habal. The inheritors of the husband are secondary to the inheritors of the father. So why are we saying over here Imanu? So still, even though this, we're asking Hashem just to be a secondary, a tafel to us. We're saying he should be with us as he was with our father. That Hashem, our God, is secondary to us and to our fathers. Why? How come it's that Lashon? So the Rebbe explains this by saying, why do we say an oitzer shel yiras shamayim? So specifically, we say a treasure, an oitzer, something which is stored of yiras shamayim. But we don't find that an oitzer of avas shamayim, just yiras shamayim. Why only yiras shamayim? Why an oitzer? A treasure comes from some things that you don't have on your own. It's but somebody collects it from other people. That treasure of Yiras Shamayim, the Yid on his own needs to work to make up that treasure. The Eibishter gets that treasure of Yiras Shamayim through the work of the Yid. The Abba, for example, you don't need that treasure because that's not so much that comes from the person. Who provides for the treasure? It is provided by the Yid, and that explains why it's only imonu, because the main avodah is that it comes from the Yid himself. Yes, the Vayda Zal Pia Yidua. We can explain this based on what is known. The Hatam al Shabayiras Shamayim Nemar Loshen Oitzer. Why does it say Bayiras Shamayim? The language of an Oitzer is Kikemoish Oitzer Hamelech, just like the treasure of the king, the storage of the treasure of the king. En biyad Hamelech lasis Oitzer. The king cannot make a treasure in loy. Unless he collects it from others, he has to collect. Others have to give to make that oitzer, to make that storage. Likewise, when we talk about the level of fear, which is the oitzer shel melech malcha amlochem hakadosh baruch hu, that is the treasure of the one king, that king's king, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Einu b'idei Shamayim. That's not in the hands of Shamayim. K'mayim Razal, as our sages say it, Hakul b'idei Shamayim chutz mira Shamayim. Everything is in the hands of Shamayim, with the exception of Yira Shamayim. Yira Shamayim, the Eibusher doesn't have on his own. That is something that a Yid brings to the table. That's treasure of the Yira Shamayim that the Eibusher has, comes from what he collects from others, what the Yid brings him, the Yira Shamayim. And the Rebbe explained that really specifically refers to Yira, because Ava comes from the Eibusher, but Yira comes from the person himself. Yes, so we can add the Hatam al Shehaloshin Oitzer Nemar B'Yira Davke. What is the reason that the language of a treasure of Yira Shamayim is Davke with regards to Yira Shamayim? But the truth of the matter is that in order to fulfill all mitzvahs, you need Abba and Yira. And all mitzvahs that a Yid does, the Eibusher needs a Yid. So anytime a Yid does a mitzvah, why don't we call that a treasure of Hashem? Because Hashem doesn't have that on his own and needs to collect it from a Yid, just like the Yira Shamayim. All the mitzvahs that they do, why do we single out and only Yira, we call this as a treasure because it comes from the Yid, but all of Torah mitzvahs, all of mitzvahs comes from the Yid. Hagam she'inyan zeh, this idea, Shakadosh Baruch Hu tzarich kaviyachol, that so to speak, Hashem needs the person to provide because he doesn't have on his own. This is really all mitzvahs. Who, in order for, let me explain, because in order for the observance of mitzvahs to be properly, who either al yidei avos Hashem or al yidei yiras Hashem, you need to do it with love of Hashem or you need to do it with fear of Hashem. What's the difference between love and fear? That love comes from above and fear comes from below, comes from the person. What's the difference between love and fear? The love of Hashem comes through a revelation of light that comes from above. The yiras Hashem, but the fear of Hashem, that comes mainly that comes through the work of the person. So taka, other mitzvahs which are infused with the level of Ava, they come from a Gilu Oyer Milmaila, but the mitzvahs that are done with Yiras Shamayim, that comes Milmata. We give an example that it comes Milmata. Valderech Yiras Melech Basar V'Dam, similar to the fear of a king of flesh and blood. A human will understand it, the fear that people have from a human king. The reason why is it that the people of the country are afraid from the king, because they accepted the king that he should be a king over them. The Kabbalah's Hamalchus hu alidei ha'om. Who accepts the kingdom that comes from the people? The Pasuk says you should be the one that puts the king. So the fear is based on the person's making a king that he put upon himself. And therefore, that is the level of yira, is that brings, comes from the person itself. He brings it in. And this explains the Loshen of Imanu. Kasher hoya im aviseinu, the language of imonu, with, because it's not the main. The main, he's only with us. Kibiyiras Hashem, when we talk about the fear of Hashem, which is the beginning of this service. It's the main and the root of all the service. Yiras Hashem, the main is the work, the service of the man. We're saying that revelation from above is only supports the person that it should be imanu, but the main is the person himself. And now the Rebbe explains why is Yira come from the work of the person, and the Ava is Milmailo, because Yira, the Rebbe explains, when you make a king, you become like a slave. That becomes your Metzias totally. So it has to come from yourself to self-negate, to become, accept the king, to become a slave of the king. You have to be fully engaged, so it has to come from yourself. So your entire essence, as opposed to love, you still remain a Metzias. The reason why the level of Yira mainly comes through the work of man, Yesh Leima, we can explain. Yira is subjugation. Especially we talk the level of fearing the king, which is that you put a king, as our sages tell, that his fear should be on you. That level of fear that comes from bittul. Bittul the yirazu, but the subjugation of this level of fear, and Moshe Alecha, koshur imzeh shu avdei shel hamelech, that is tied to the fact that you are a servant of the king, and therefore you have that yira, that level of fear. The teva ha'eved hu she'emes upachat ha'odnolov. The nature of the slave is that the dread and the fear of the master is upon him. So you have to be a level of bittul, of yira, a bittul of a slave, a bittul, a total bittul. So a bittul, the eved who bittul betachlis, the bittul of slavery, that level of bittul required of yira, of slavery, of like Soim Tos Melech HaMelech, is a bittul betachlis. That's why it comes through the person. It's not imposed, it's not from the outside, it's from within you, from the person. Because when the impact that takes place by the person through a revelation of light which comes from above, that is something like added to you. You have you, and you get an inspiration from above. So what's the change that comes through from above? It's just in your shape, it's not your essence. In the tzir of the person, he has the avas Hashem, he has bittul. But it's not from the person. There's no change in the person by himself. In order to come to total subjugation, like an eved, bittul the eved, the subjugation of eved. The difference between a free person and a slave is in his existence, essence of his existence. It's not an added. The slave is not added to his essence. That is who he is. That's his mitzias. Mitzias of an eved. So in order to become that mitzias of an eved of Hashem, is that the person himself accepts to be the servant of the king. can't give it to him from the outside. That would be an addition. But in order for him to be himself, it has to come from within him. So he has become, his Metzias becomes a Metzias of an Ebed. So here we're talking about the level of bittul, level of yira, and the level of acceptance on yourself. But the similar things the Rebbe wants to say now is with Mesiras Nefesh. There could be a Mesiras Nefesh, which is sort of added. You still have Mesiras Nefesh. And there can be a Mesiras Nefesh which comes from Bittul Betachlis. And that's the difference between Yehi Hashem Elikeinu, which comes Milmailo Imanu, when we have Mesiras Nefesh and things that we do on our own. We have Mesiras Nefesh because of our being a slave, Yiras Shamayim, and Mesiras Nefesh even on items which we're not commanded even to have Mesiras Nefesh for. Yesh loymar shal derech zeh u'b'Mesiras Nefesh. You can say that similarly is b'Mesiras Nefesh. The kivon she'Mesiras Nefesh u'bittul betachlis, since Mesiras Nefesh is total subjugation, ubefrat, and especially Mesiras Nefesh, he al inyonim ka'elu shal pidin tzivulev de lamaylo ein mechuyev limser nafshi aleim. It to Mesiras Nefesh for these items is not even according to halacha. There's no instruction. There's no milamaylo from above. He's not mechuyev to give up his life from them. So when you have Mesiras Nefesh totally, and even for matters which there's no command for them, so that means that it's coming from you, not from above. There's no obligation. Nobody's telling you. That's why it comes, not because there is a revelation of light from above. That comes, the person gives over himself. It comes from within, from the person himself. Now we understand even more why he used this pasuk. He's asking for Hashem's help. But why is he using this pasuk of Yehi Hashem Elkeinu Imanu? We understand that the request and the prayer of the Bal Hagula of the Friedrich Rebbe Bahasicha the Gimel Tammuz, in that talk of Gimel Tammuz, it was using the pasuk Yehi Havai Elkeinu Imanu, be with us, like you were with our fathers. Because what he was talking over there was the service of self-sacrifice. Within the work of service self-sacrifice is such items, on many items, shall be din ein mechuyev limser nafshei aleim. According to halacha, he is not required, obligated to give up his life. So that level of Mesiras Nefesh, Mechlal Mesiras Nefesh, especially for things that were not even commanded, Shabo Be'iker Ma'odam Atzmai, that comes from the person himself. So that's why we're asking Hashem to be with us, because we are the main lead. That's our Oitzer of Yiras Shamayim. We bring that. The Kibon Sheba Avodah the Mesiras Nefesh, Ha'ikir Avodas Adam, in the service of Mesiras Nefesh, the main part is the person's work. The revelation of light that comes from above just helps the persons in his service. That's why he started his request and his prayer, using the language of the pasuk, Yehi Havai Elikeinu Imanu, may Hashem Elikeinu be with us. Because it's with us, because it's us, the main thing. It's the avodah from the avodah sa'odom. It's his mesiras nefesh. It's his devotion. It comes from the odom itself. But the Rebbe will explain now that when we want to say secondary, sometimes we use the word im, and sometimes we use the word es. They both mean secondary. But when you say something is secondary, you're saying two things. He's secondary, but it's still secondary. I mean, in other words, there's a comparison. When we use the loshon im, while we're saying secondary, but we're emphasizing, but he's secondary to you, so he's a connection. He's similar to you. When we say the word es, that means that he's distant from you. In this case, we're using loshon im, but I will explain now. In a loshon im, when we say im with, even though it's with, not the main, but is shayich ksheyesh dimyan ben shnei advorim. It's only when there's a similarity, there's a comparison between these two items. Together with, like we find our sages' blessed memory expound the pasuk. They shall station themselves, the prophets that Moshe Rabbeinu gave over. He says they should stand there with you. So what do our sages say? What does it mean? Im, with you. They will be with you. They will be similar to you. In other words, there's a comparison. There's a level in which they're similar. We were just talking about the language of im points that it's secondary. Kinal siv base. That's not the main. I said the earlier siv base. But mikol mokoy, it's secondary. Yesh dimyan la'ikar. It has a similarity to ikar. A similar idea is also with the word es. When it says also the word es, that also points to something secondary. Kedrashas razal ala posik, as the sages expound the verse, v'rochas es besoroi. That the S means not only the besore, but there should be nothing secondary on the flesh, which means what this secondary to besore, should be no chatzitza over there. But basically, the word S represents not the basar, but something on top, next to the basar, secondary to the basar. And yet, even though it's second, he's still similar to the main. By S, we say that to Kidrashas Razal ala posik, as the Chazal Razal expound the verse ala posik, the nosu itoch, they will carry with you itoch. He says b'doimim loch, itcha with you, S itcha, but also b'doimim loch. So you both, Sai Imcha and Sai S, mean both secondary and comparable. But the two languages, which is the main emphasis, when it says Imcha, it's mostly emphasized that it's similar. When it says S, it's mostly emphasized that it's secondary, even though they both means both. Umavur b'sifrei digduk, in the books that talk about the digbook, the grammar, the hatofel hamerum is below lotion S, the secondary, which is hinted when it says S, hu tofel yoiser mahatofel shabeloshon am. It's a greater, it's more secondary than the secondary in loshon am. Am is not as secondary; it's more compared. So it comes out according to this. The loshon S. When you say the word S, secondary, Ikerahat Gosha, who the main emphasis is Shadova Sha'imrim Olov S, that item that you're saying yes, Urak Tofel is only a secondary. And when you use Veloshin Im, when you say Imonu Im Avisenu, Ikerahat Gosha, who Aladimian Dishnei Advorim. The main emphasis on Imcha, that it's secondary, that it's comparison. Move on, so from this we understand. The main emphasis when we say Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu, we're not trying to emphasize Hashem Elokeinu is secondary to the person. The main work is the person. Hashem is secondary. We're trying to say there's a similarity between what is secondary to the person. So, what is the dimyan between? We're asking Hashem should be with us with our service. The shahadimyan shebeinayim hu ba'inyan the ikar v'tafel. That the comparison is in the concept. What is the main and what is secondary? The kemoi shashleimus da'avodah sa'odom. Just like when is the complete, the wholesomeness of the service of man? Is when he does it with his own koyach. And that's why that's why it becomes secondary. But that comes milmailo, but that's secondary because the main avodah is the yira is on his own. Base. But the comparison to the similarity is al derech zeh leidach. Shashleimus da avodah sa'odom. That when is the wholesomeness of the service of man? He kishavedosei, when the fact that he serves. Even though that he's serving with his own koyach, and also the mesiras nefesh, which include also having sacrifice of those matters, which according to halacha he's not obligated to give over. So it's not because he wants to serve Hashem. That would mean from himself. It is because he is subjugated to Hashem. It's not him, even though it comes from his essence, the person himself, but it's not because he wants to serve Hashem, but because he is subjugated to godliness. The kivon shebitulei lakodesh baruch hu bittul betachlis, since his subjugation to Hashem is total subjugation. Lachein, therefore, kol mitzvah, every mitzvah. Gam kshalpidin ein mechuyev limser nafshel zeh, even though an alpidin he doesn't have to self-sacrifice for himself. He etzloi be'efim she'ein etzloi, by him it is in a way she'ein shayich klal sheloi lekaimo. It does not, it cannot at all apply not to do it. Even though you have to do it for mesiras nefesh. So the comparison to above is that he does it because of bittul telekus. It has to come from within because that's the main, but it's compared to the Ein Sof that it's coming that because of his bittul of Hashem and not for himself, not because of himself. And we can add through that subjugation to godliness, that adds also to the level of mesiras nefesh. When his mesiras nefesh is because he wants and he decided to fulfill the command of Hashem. Even in mesiras nefesh, if that's the motivating and that's the decision that he's going to do it regardless. But there is still a possibility to be other. He decided to do so. But at his level, he could decide otherwise. Why is he actually standing with Siddur Nefesh? That is because of his decision. So, as opposed to when the Siddur Nefesh is because of his subjugation to Hashem. That's why every mitzvah that the Eibishter commanded is in a way it doesn't, it's not shaykh, it's not apply at all not to do it. So there's no room for be otherwise. So that means that his Mesiras Nefesh, when it comes because he is batul to Hashem, it comes from Milmaila, then it means that there is no, that adds to his Mesiras Nefesh, that there's not even a possibility for the person to think otherwise. That's the only thing that he does is his bittul and his Mesiras Nefesh. And that's the comparison. So both, it comes from him, but it comes because of his bittul to Hashem. So there's no space, there's no room, there's no possibility to do otherwise because he's totally subjugated to Hashem. Based on this, we can explain when we're talking about the total level of bittul, or the bittul of a merkava, because this is the Ratzon Hashem, not something that you make a choice, but this will explain why the Baal Hagiula, the Friedrich Rebbe, would say, "Wir seien doch nicht gleich zu Aveiseinu, welche seine gewinn Baal Mesiras Nefesh bepoil," that we are not compared to our fathers who had Mesiras Nefesh actuality. Shekol al gam atzmei bazeh, he also included in them himself, as if to say that he also does not have that Mesiras Nefesh bepoil. How could he say that when he just had Mesiras Nefesh? Ki amitis ha'inyan di Mesiras Nefesh, because the true idea of Mesiras Nefesh hu kisha Mesiras Nefesh hu mitzad habitl. Real Mesiras Nefesh comes when that Mesiras Nefesh comes of the level of subjugation. Kinal Siv Dalet, I said before Siv Dalet, that it's the bittul that brings about the Mesiras Nefesh. Kivon shebebittul yesh kama v'kama darges, since in bittul there exist many levels. Kinal Sivhei, as we said before in Sivhei, it could be bittul by himself. It could be mitzad atzmoi. It could be mitzad elikus, merkava. That's why it's applicable that he could say on himself mitzad anova, because of humility, that it's lacking. He lacks in the concept of Mesiras Nefesh. And this is also based on this, we can also explain what he says in the Sicha, that in this request that we ask, Hashem Elikeinu should be with us, Nichlal Gam HaPirush, this also includes the interpretation, the Yehi Loshen Havtocha, that it will be a promise, Vetzai Mitus. Because Kizesh Tefillah Bakosha V'Havtochem Shnei Inyonim, this, that prayer, when we ask, and a promise are two matters, Shoinim, Ukitfillah hi bakosha sa'odom. Tefillah is the request of the person. V'havtocha hi milamaylo, and a promise comes from above. Gam betzadikim, also betzadikim. Kasher heim mitzius v'dakus akoponim, when they are an entity, let's say in a refined way, but still they're an entity. Tefillah v'havtocha im shnei inyonim. The prayer and the promise are two separate subjects. The havtochas hatzadik hi b'shlichusei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When the tzaddik promises, he does it as an agent of Hashem. Utfilas hatzadik, but the prayer of the tzaddik, he bakoshas hatzadik atzmai, that's the request of the tzaddik himself asks. Masha ein kein kshahat tzaddik hu be'ofen. But when the tzaddik is in a way, shagam ha'avoida shaloi bekoyach atzmai, that even his service, which he does on his own, which seemingly should be a mitzias, but that too, when he betachlis a bittul, a total bittul, azai gam behatfila bakosha shaloi. So then, in his prayer, there is still gam inyan havtocha, also the idea of a promise, because there is not two separate. He is at the time that is taka b'koyach atzmai, but it tachlis habitl, it comes mitzad milmaila. So in that bakosha, there is also a promise. Yesh lahoisif, we can add the me'ein zeh, similar to this idea, shagam hametzias si bebitl, that even when it comes because of the metzias is bebitl, imshir gam ha'makushorim v'shayochim elov, he extended this to those who are tied and are connected, belong to him. Al yidei shehishrish bahem mesiras nefesh, by implanting in rooting in them to have mesiras nefesh, even on matters shal pidin, which according to halacha tzivud de lamailo, which is an instruction of above, ein mechuyev limsur nafshi alehem. He's not obligated to give up his life for them. So that would be mesiras nefesh mitzad ha'odam. That will be the self-sacrifice that comes from the person. But on top of that, that it comes mitzad milamato, shagam hamesiras nefesh al inyonim elu, and also the self-sacrifice on these matters, tia ba'ifun shein shayich klal ba'ifun achar, should be in a way that it's not possible at all to be anything different, which is mesiras nefesh mitzad ha'elakus. That's mesiras nefesh because of godliness. So within his own mitzias, to have the mesiras nefesh that shein shayich klal ba'ifun achar, that's mitzad ha'elakus. Therefore, zeh shabakosha de bal ha'geula kolu gam inyan havtocha ugam mitzad ha'mekablim. So therefore, that this request that the Baal HaGeula requested, it also includes the idea of a promise. Ugam mitzad hamekablim, also because of the recipients from their perspective, because even when they do it in a way that it comes mitzad ha'elikus. So may there be fulfilled the promise. God should be with us as he was with our fathers. Not to neglect us, not to push us off. And for all Jewish people, there will be light, spiritually and physically.